Right, welcome to Mark Tries to Use OBS and Fails Miserably, otherwise known as the Global Azure session Give Your CMS Site a Serverless Supercharge. I'm Mark Allen, I'm an Azure MVP and not a streaming expert, it seems. And you can find me online at MarkXA, so if you're watching this live, feel free to drop questions in the live chat and I'll try and keep an eye on it. If you're not watching live, then hit me on Twitter or LinkedIn or wherever else MarkXA exists and I'll see if I can help you out. Before we get started, you might want to just take a screenshot of that screen there. The QR code there takes you off to some sort of special badge for Global Azure. There is a Microsoft Learn Challenge going on, a 30 days to learn it challenge. And if you want a virtual background and yet another badge, then you can go off to the link at the bottom on there. I believe you have to register to get that one, but I'm sure it's a lovely background anyway. Right, meanwhile, I will tell you a little story about my experience in the past, having been somebody who has once encountered the word web and therefore got asked, can you build a website for me? My experience of content management systems and trying to run sites that contain content management systems. They're great. They allow you to do all sorts of wonderful things. They also allow your clients to do all sorts of wonderful things. But they do occasionally have a little bit of trouble. First problem they usually have is that they're quite expensive, particularly for the smaller customers. If you've got a content management system running for a small business, you still have to basically pay for an entire hosting system for them all the time. And they're usually quite slow, particularly if you've gone cheap on the hosting, then you'll tend to find that they're not that responsive. So you lose a lot of Google juice on something that's server driven in that way. Certainly, I've not had great success in getting anything high up the Google rankings on a content managed basis. Also, they're not terribly secure. Even if you've got them hosted in platform as a service and you don't have a VM under there to get hacked, and I have had VMs hacked in the past, you will tend to find that as soon as you've got a number of plugins in there, that you will start to get vulnerabilities popping up. There was a fairly well-known form plugin quite recently that posted that it had a 0 day, and that took down a few WordPress sites, I believe. And another problem is that if you've got your small business site and it's running on one VM or one hosting platform, it doesn't deal well with traffic. So there was not that long ago, again, there was a local TV station around here in Ireland was doing an appeal, and it was a popular appeal. The TV program had done its job, but of course everybody hit the donation page and their site went down. So again, not a great experience. Although the functionality of a content management system is nice, it would be so much nicer if there was something faster, something cheaper, something more secure, and something more scalable. So today I'm going to talk about what I tend to call serverless websites. So I'm going to talk about what I mean by a serverless website, how you actually go about putting one together. I will then move on to Azure Static Web Apps, which is the Azure way of doing what I personally call serverless websites, because I think static sounds boring. And then we'll do a quick demo of taking a WordPress site and adding a serverless front end to it. So, what am I talking about when I say serverless websites? That's what that's what I mean by a serverless website is something that has static content, so not something that's driven by a server. So all the HTML and stuff that's coming down to your browser is coming directly from static content storage, and so comes down very, very fast. The difference here is that, rather than just being completely static, what you do is you have some amount of JavaScript going on in there at the client side. And then what the JavaScript does, of course, is to call off to an API to do the actual work that a traditional server would have done rendering the HTML content. And as long as you're running that on functions as a service, some sort of serverless API stack, then you can scale up and down and get all those nice serverless benefits on a fairly traditional website. This is often known as the Jamstack, which stands for JavaScript APIs and markup. So in other words, JavaScript functions as a service API and HTML markup. So we get all these advantages with a Jamstack or serverless website. You get really high speed because your first page render is as instantaneous as it can be. People who've actually migrated from content management systems to a serverless website, generally get about a 10 times speed increase to get their first meaningful paint. Because it's serverless, essentially it's extremely scalable. It costs nothing when nobody's viewing it. Your costs are essentially just, your only ongoing cost is for the storage, which, if you're storing in any normal sort of cloud storage, is practically negligible. You pay for the bandwidth, which you would have been paying for anyway, and then you pay for the amount of time that your APIs are running. Being a serverless API, you only pay for the number of milliseconds and then the amount of memory that your API actually takes to perform the action it needs to take. It's extremely secure. Obviously, if most of your content is stored in your cloud content, so in your Azure storage, unless somebody has managed to hack your Active Directory, they're not going to be able to get at that. And as long as you've put some level of security around your API, again, probably Active Directory, but some form of endpoint security on your API, then you're very unlikely to get hacked. It's extremely stable. There's no server to go down. Even if your serverless API was to go down, that's a platform as a service thing. So there will be more coming along soon, and your front end being storage will always run. It's portable. You can host storage pretty much anywhere, and you can run Azure functions pretty much anywhere. So there is no necessity to get tied into a hosting platform that's tied to your particular content management system or your particular API or your particular programming stack. You can move it and host it just about anywhere you want. And it's extremely flexible. You're not tied to having to write things in PHP or even .NET or JavaScript. You can do it in any combination of languages that you like, in theory. So there's a certain amount of different ways you have to do things, but if you do, then you end up with a much faster system going on at the end of the day. So the next question is, okay, so you're getting all these advantages, but how do you actually put it together? So the first thing you're going to need is some content. So that content is going to be I'm not talking about necessarily your HTML content here or your CSS content. I'm talking about the content that makes up your site. So if it's a blog site, that will be your blog posts and your comments and maybe your pages. But essentially the things that make up your site. What you'll probably want to have as well on any non-trivial site is some form of content management system. Now, that can be anything that can manage content and produce something. So it could be a headless content management system like something like Contentful. It could be you committing pages to Git, or it could be WordPress or some other, Umbraco or something, and anything that has a content management interface and has some sort of API that you can then pull that content out. Once you've got that content, you will generally then put it through a static site generator. So as I say, if that content is your blog posts or whatever, then you will have a static site generator, so something like Hugo or Gatsby or one of the other well-known site generators. And what that will allow you to do is to take that content and turn it into an actual compiled, as it were, website. So that turns your content into the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that is your actual website. So at that point, you then have that static site that you can then deploy to the cloud. What you'll then want to probably stick on top of that is some form of JavaScript framework. Could be React, could be Vue, could just be vanilla JavaScript. If you're really just doing a blog site, there may be no JavaScript at all, but usually you'll have some sort of JavaScript framework to do some actual work. And to talk to that JavaScript framework, you'll also have some serverless API functions. What you'll then do, ideally, is to have some continuous deployment. So every time you make a change in your content management system and generate some new content, that will kick off your static site generator and then deploy that out to your cloud website. The continuous deployment will hopefully then deploy it to some form of speedy hosting. It could just be storage, but quite often it would be to an actual CDN, so that whoever is accessing your site wherever around the world, they will have a local fast copy to get to them, just to give them that extra bit of Google juice, extra bump up the listings, and that extra that extra sort of decrease in bounce rate. And well, the right-hand side of that, the continuous deployment CDN hosting, the serverless API, and to some extent the static site generator, the CI part of that, is where static web apps comes in. So what static web apps gives you is essentially, it gives you an automatic CI/CD pipeline. So when you get new content coming in and push that up to your to your source control repo, it will automatically run that through your static site generator and deploy that out for you. It gives you the storage, so it will, the static assets that you're pushing up there, it will give you the storage for that. And it also has Azure Functions integrated in there so that you can run your serverless API. It is officially still in preview, so there's still a couple of rough edges, but I can't imagine it actually being in preview much longer. So it's certainly not dangerous to use at this stage. The only major thing missing at this point is Apex domains. So if you need to host a website at fred.com rather than www.fred.com, you have to jump through a few hoops to actually make that work. But they are promising that Apex domain support will be coming very soon. And this is roughly how that CI/CD step works. You change your code, you update your content, you push that to Git repo somewhere, and then off that triggers GitHub Actions, or as of a couple of weeks ago, I think, an Azure DevOps pipeline that will use Microsoft's Oryx build server to build your Hugo site or your Gatsby site or whatever, or to compile your React or whatever your sort of front-end framework you're using, turn that all into something that can be deployed out, and then it will push it out to the static content and the serverless APIs. The other nice thing it gives you is preview sites. So as well as your main production live site, if you put in a pull request when you're pushing to GitHub or to your Git repo, then it will also generate for you a second private site that somebody who's reviewing that PR can go to and check what it actually looks like, how it actually behaves before they merge that into main and it goes into production. It has built-in support for authentication, so it has built-in OAuth endpoints, so you can authenticate using Azure, or you can authenticate using the usual social providers. So you can have a GitHub or a Microsoft or a Twitter login, or even a Google or Facebook login if you want. Gives you a logout endpoint as well. And that allows you to not only control what assets in the static content are visible, but it allows you to then pass that information through to your serverless API so that you know what the user is allowed to do when it comes to the API side of things. In the API, you can drop your Azure functions directly into your site. So it's not like most providers who do this sort of thing where you have to have a static part and an API part. You can have it all in the same repo, all together, all deploying at the same time, building and deploying at the same time. And at the moment they're supporting C#, JavaScript and Python, or at least last time I looked, and I have no doubt more will come along as time passes as well. I can't, Azure Functions itself obviously supports just about everything these days, so I would expect that sort of the Azure Functions in static web apps to follow suit. It supports routing, so you can define path rewriting, which is useful if you're, for instance, taking an old content management system and having to rewrite paths to a new format. It allows you to define the access control for using RBAC. So if you're logged in, your authentication provider has roles, then you can define which areas of the site particular roles are allowed to access. It'll allow you to do redirects, either temporary or permanent, and it also allows you to define custom error pages, custom headers that you need to return for security reasons or whatever, and custom MIME types for specific types of content. And some other useful things it will do, it allows you to obviously to define custom domains, so you can go to your, you can say that this is www.fred.com. It's got a very useful VS Code extension for the whole building and deploying process, and you can configure it to build all sorts of different things, from plain HTML through Vue, through Angular, through to just about anything you can imagine. So I'll just give a few seconds here before we move on to the demo to see if there's any questions in the live chat. While I take a quick sip of water. Okay, there's no questions there. Then I will move on. So I'm going to do a quick demo here of taking a sample WordPress site and using Hugo as the static site generator and deploying something that's been content managed in WordPress out to a serverless Azure static web app. Right, so first of all, we will go here. So here I have a Hugo site. I'll come to the WordPress bit in a minute, but just so you know what Hugo is doing. So it has a simple configuration file. It has themes, so it has a theme here called Main Road, which is the view. It has static assets, and at the moment it has no content in there. So this is a pretty much plain Hugo website that has had a theme applied to it. And what I can do here with a bit of luck, if I say Hugo server, that will take that, build it all into a site, and it will then allow me to go and view that at localhost 1313. So So there we can see, I have a plain site with no content in it yet. So next step, I will go back here, and in my Azure I have the static web apps preview extension installed, so I can say I want to turn this into static web app. So I'll choose my Azure subscription. I have some local code. I'm going to create that in my personal repository. I'm going to call it Global Azure 2021 Demo. And it'll be private for now. And this is going to be the name of the static web app that I'm going to create in Azure. This is a Hugo site. As you can see, there's, you can pre-provision various things if you want, or you can just go for the custom route. In this particular case, it's in sort of my site is in the root of my repo. My Azure Functions code is going to go into a folder called API, and when Hugo builds, by default it puts the output into a folder called public. And let's put it in West Europe. So that's now provisioning a GitHub repo for me. Created that. It's going to push it out to GitHub. Now it's creating the static web app in Azure. And now, as you can see, as part of that, it created a GitHub action for us. So if I go and open that up, you can see it's created as it's created as a GitHub action. I can actually go and look at that over here. It's already added that to my repo and created this YAML. So you can see it's saying when it pushes to the main branch, it will do this Azure Static Web Apps build and deploy job, and then it has this thing for closing pull requests if it was triggered off a pull request. And you can see down here, those are those parameters that we specified when we were doing the things in VS Code. So if I go over here and watch this, see it's doing a build and deploy here. And what I'll do while I'm waiting for that, I will go over to the Azure portal. And you can see there we have our demo static web app, and it's provisioned that with a URL there. So there we are. That means we must have finished back here. Yep, that built. And we now have our Hugo site deployed out and built automatically to a Azure static website. So we'll go back to here. Stop that. I'll just do a quick git pull there. So we've got our pull down, we're up to date with the workflow push that happened earlier. And then the next thing I'm going to do, first of all, I'm going to switch branches here. So create a new branch. I'm going to call it, this will be the one with some WordPress content. Right. And the next thing I'm going to do, here I have, this is kind of black magic, but it's not complicated black magic, but you can see this is basically a .NET app that goes off to the WordPress API and pulls out all the information and then pushes it into the Hugo site. So what I've actually got back in here, if we're very lucky, by the power of Docker, I should have a local WordPress site running here with a few dummy posts in it. So if I go back here and run this, that will go and talk to my WordPress site and pull out the pages and the posts and stuff from that site, pull it over and drop it all into my Hugo site. So if I go back here, you can see, I've got some changes now, and in particular in the content there, now I have some posts and some pages. So what I can now do on my new branch is to say WP content. Oh, sorry, I've just got one more thing I need to do here. It's for the part of the demo I want to. I'm going to add a little extra page there for a later demo. You might be able to guess what that does if you're really, really clever. I'm going to add this as WordPress content, commit that. I will push it up. And then I will create a pull request. I want to merge that into my main branch. So I will go back here and we'll go back to GitHub, and if we're really lucky, then we'll have a pull request here, WP content, and we now have an action running which is building that branch for us. So we'll have to wait a short while here. See, this time we can actually watch a bit of what it's doing. So it's pulling down the static web apps Docker container from the Microsoft Container Registry, so to do the build and deploy. Then you can see that, if you saw that earlier, that's the Hugo output there. It's building it using Oryx, pushing it away. Zipping and deploying. There we are, and it's run. And I will have an email in a second that tells me this as well, but you can see here it's now pushed that to a different site. So you can see here the one we built before was lemonc.azure static apps. You can see we've got lemonc-1.westeurope.static apps. So this secret URL here is now the same site, but with all our WordPress content in it. So what we now have is WordPress running as our content management system, so people can still use the CMS side of WordPress that they know and love, but they can now publish it out to a nice, really nice, fast, static and serverless website. And just to show a little bit of extra stuff here, I've got a contact form here, and if we go over here and go back to this API folder here, you can see, you might, if you know Azure Functions, you might recognize the format of this, but basically this is an Azure Functions project inside that API folder. Specifically, it has one called contact form with a function.json and an index.js, and that just pulls out the name email message and sends it back to us. But obviously, we could extend this to do anything we want, but purely by having that code in there without having to do anything else, we can now go off here and say name Mark, email Mark, say message hello Mark, and there we go. That's our JSON returned from the API. We could send that off somewhere or do whatever else we wanted to do. That could be a full React single page application thing doing everything that we need to do for sort of something really complicated on a website. But the point is there that you can very easily hook in your backend API like that. So that's pretty much it for that. So feel free to drop any questions in the chat there if any of that wasn't clear. Otherwise, meanwhile, we'll just move on to the end here. So, in summary, you can take your content management site, pull the content out, shove it into a static web app, and you end up with a site that's 10 times faster, probably 10 times cheaper, and probably 10 times more secure as well, however you measure that. It is capable of doing anything a traditional site can do. You do have to think differently to do something in the pure API-driven world where you're not generating HTML. So, if you're used to MVC, only the API bits of MVC, and if you're used to WinForms, you're going to have to think very differently. But once it's up and going, it's very easy to look after. It's there's no fighting with PHP or ASP in terms on that side of things. You just have code at one side and markup on the other side, and a bit of JavaScript to link the two up. And honestly, once you've tried it, you'll never go back. One side made one site like this. I decided I was never going back to horrible old MVC sites or horrible old CMS. It's this is the way that I'm doing it now. Just some quick resources there. So there's obviously, as with everything, all the stuff you need is on docs.microsoft.com. If you're interested in Hugo, that's at gohugo.io. That's my personal favorite static website generator, but there's plenty of others out there. I forget the name, but there is one that's written in .NET if you're a .NET fan. And that's all. There seem to be no questions in the chat, so I will now see if I can get persuade my stream to actually stop again. Thank you, everybody.